Yeah, this was a study that we did in 2022, and hence, first thing I should mention is that it was really hamstrung as a consequence of the pandemic. But so that was one of the shortcomings that I want to put up right up front before I get into what we did. Seychelles is a fascinating place to work. As far as the recreational fisheries are concerned, obviously the first thing we had to do was to look at what is what and who's catching what and how is it structured. Which button is it? The green one?
Yeah, the big green one.
The big green one. Got him. So, yeah, we... I can't see, so I'll have to look a little bit at that at the screen here. So the first thing that I would like to mention is that the Seychelles government and the Seychelles Fishing Authority have recognized the existence of the recreational fishery for a long time. If you have a look at the annual reports, you'll always see, even going back to the 1990s, you'll always see the recreational fishery is a very important thing. 2 years later, there's nothing. 3 years later, yeah, the recreational fishery is becoming more, you know, the boats are increasing, etc., etc. But when we started this and had to look at the available data on the recreational fishery, it was extremely limited, and in fact, to such an extent that it was in such a state that you couldn't really use it. But nevertheless, they recognize it now, and things have changed, as you'll see later on, and recognize that it forms part of the blue economy within the fisheries as well as in the tourism sector. And if we have a look at it later on, you'll see that it is more important in the tourism sector than in the fisheries sector. The objectives were to, first of all, gauge levels of participation in the fishery, and then to have a look at the expenditure of the participants, and then also look at how this whole expenditure is distributed, and particularly looking at leakages from the economy. The geospatial distribution of effort and expenditure was also examined, and then ultimately we looked at what are the recreational fishers targeting. And Wayne, sit down. So, and then we looked at employment in the recreational fishery, and then also enjoyment, in other words, the perceived quality of the recreational fishery. The social importance, and then of course we looked at the economic contribution and economic impact of this fishery. The fishery, some of them are here, can basically be divided into three. There's the fly fishing, which is to a very large extent happening on the outer islands, and it's typically catch and release. Then there is the inner island deep sea big game fishing, boat-based trolling and jigging, bottom bait fishing, and focusing or targeting pelagical and demersal species. And then there's shore angling along on the inner islands, in other words, Mahe, Praslin and Ladi, from the sandy shore as well as from the rocky shore using lures or bait. So those are the three basic sectors that we have, and this is the way in which we have categorized our examination of the economics of this fishery. So the boats, if we have a quick look at the boats, there's three categories. You've got the little guys fishing with the mini mahis on the left, and then you've got the not so little guys in the center, and then of course you have the big boys and their toys. Let me tell you a little story. One day I went out to sea with one of these things that has got these towers, 3 levels of towers going up. We went to the drop-off, which is 60 nautical miles from Mahe, and when we came back, as is custom, one sits down and has a beer with the skipper in the first pub you get to. So that was obviously in Mahe. And I said to the skipper, John, as we normally do here, I say, John, can I chip in for some fuel? Well, the skipper nearly killed himself laughing. You must understand, this is a 60-foot vessel and travels at 29 knots. And he said to me, do you know how much fuel we've used? I said, no, I've got no idea. He says, we used 2 tons. So that made me think, you know, if anybody has ever really looked at the carbon footprint of the boat-based recreational fishery. Globally, just to sort of put it all into perspective, recreational fisheries are big, and they generate a lot of money. And here's some estimates of recreational fishing contributions. They're always a surprise. Bahamas, for example, 96 million. Costa Rica, 370. Hawaii, 140. Martinique, 88. South Africa, 1.3 billion. France, 164. It tells you that these these fisheries are not small, and quite frankly, in very many instances, the employment and the income generated is far larger than some of the commercial fisheries. Chris and I were discussing this now the other day. It's my opinion that in South Africa, for example, the recreational boat-based fishery is much larger than the commercial line fishery, or in fact greater or bigger than the inshore trawling industry. So yeah, and if ignored and unchecked by management, can result in economic losses, stock assessment errors, and accelerated depletion of particular target species. The data collection was from March to October in 2022. We collected primary data through questionnaires, in person and online, and we divided it into resident recreational anglers and non-resident recreational anglers. And we also had access to household surveys to, say, for example, determine what is the general sort of number of recreational anglers on the island, and what percentage does that make up of the total population. And the Seychelles visitors, there were we interviewed folks at the airport. The entire report is actually on the web, and if you're interested, just put in the title and you can then see all the detail. Secondary data, stakeholder engagements with the various authorities, and IDC, the Islands Development Company, private fishing charters, marine spatial planning initiatives, and various retail operators. So we really try to cover all the bases. What is interesting and what's in terms of the economic contributions is that the non-resident anglers make the greatest contribution. And what is interesting is that they make up around about 7 to 10% of all visitors. But they are, some of them, in other words, those that go to the outer islands, so about 550 per annum over a 3-year period, information that we got from IDC. 93% of them, that's their primary motivation to go to those locations, mainly Alphonse and the associated islands, whereas the non-resident inner island anglers, which make up between 18 and 26,000 per year, only 43% of them were actually, that angling was their primary motivation for going to Seychelles. So obviously this we needed to bring into account when we started doing the numbers. The resident anglers we found makes up around about 10% of the adult population. Sorry, it's not HH survey, it's household surveys that we undertook. And as I mentioned earlier, the value chain is closely tied to the tourism industry. And most of it goes to accommodation, restaurant, bars, retail. The leakage from the economy is quite large and was estimated at close on 52%. And that's because of the ownership of the large hotels, charter boats, liveaboard yachts. And the sector in general can, we estimated that it can account for around about 1,500 jobs. So if we have a look at some of the numbers, the annual expenditure, if you have a look there, the way that we did this is the non-resident anglers and resident anglers. And in the first three columns, we give we give it on a general basis, and then we combine the inner and the outer islands to get an overall value of what the recreational fishery contribution to the economy is. Here at the bottom, you can get the definitions in terms of what is expenditure, what is economic impact, contribution, and the income contribution. These are economic terms. If you want to know exactly what they mean, Chris is the economist, and he knows exactly what those mean. But at the end of the day, you will see that the total direct and indirect economic contribution of expenditure is in the region between 300 and 350 million US dollars. It is big. One of the things that I should mention right up front as well is the one sector that is not included here is the boatyard sector. We just couldn't do that because of various constraints. But these are some of the things that obviously need to be looked at a later stage to get a complete handle on the value of the fishery. The target species, the non-resident anglers on the outer islands, mostly GTs, bonefish and permit, and most of that fishery is catch and release where possible. Non-resident anglers on the inner islands, they target mostly yellowfin, dorado, and wahoo, as well as some demersal fish, and many of those fish are actually retained. If we have a look at the resident anglers, it's a totally different composition. They target mostly demersal fish, grouper and red emperor, and yeah, well, of the red emperor, 90% is retained, as well as of jobfish. The total catch of the recreational fishery is in the region of about 1,200 tons, which is about a third, or just less, or just more, because the average catch in the commercial artisanal fishery is between 3,500, 3,800, and 4,200 tons. So it makes up a significant proportion of the catch. Satisfaction, angler satisfaction on the outer islands, very high. Angler satisfaction on the inner islands, not as high as on the outer islands, and I think that has much to do with the fact that there are guides that can guide anglers who don't really know what they're doing on the flats, but then they catch fish, and of course that satisfaction level just shoots up through the roof. Anglers are willing to pay for an annual license fee. Obviously, the outer island non-resident anglers are prepared to pay quite a bit more. The resident anglers, there's a little bit of a hesitation in terms of willingness to pay, but nevertheless, most of them are also willing to pay. The introduction of new regulations, size and bag limits, non-resident anglers are unperturbed and would still come to Seychelles, particularly to the outer islands. Whereas the resident anglers, it is very likely that they'll push back against the regulations. But this is being dealt with in various ways in the educational of fishers in Seychelles through SFA at the moment. There are a number of recommendations that have come from this particular project. One of the more important ones was the implementation by SFA, the Seychelles Fishing Authority, to set up a monitoring and research program for the recreational fisheries. And this has just been done now and has been actioned by Jan Robinson at SFA. Yeah, there's research priorities that need to be looked at in terms of stock assessment, using the commercial as well as the recreational data. Because as I said early on, you know, you're talking about 1/3 of fish being caught by recreational sector, and all that information is not being incorporated into the stock assessments. There's some huge errors. The institution of management measures for all species. A lot of species now have regulations that have been implemented. So that process is going on. It is a delicate process that is taking place, such that at the moment there are no real fines that are imposed. Fines will be imposed maybe in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, once the anglers sort of get used to the regulations, and then one can bring some order into the entire fishery. So what we concluded, it provides a good baseline for what we wanted to do, but as I said, it was COVID time, so a lot of work still needs to be done. But thank you to all my co-authors and co-workers, and thank you for your attention.